Hey guys, tonight You stand at the edge of a warm, dark river, the kind that moves like a long animal through reeds, and the air smells of clay, lamp smoke, and fresh flatbread. Fires wink along mud brick roofs, while a drum keeps time for a city learning to be a city. We're slipping into the first nights of Mesopotamia to watch the Anunnaki take their seats in the sky and in courtyards, quiet judges, bright names, and neighbors with very particular tastes and offerings. Quick reality check. You probably won't survive this without mosquito bite immunity and a crash course in ancient plumbing. Fortunately, tonight, you only have to listen and breathe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is on your clock. I love seeing the constellation of places light up the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move through lanes of Uruk, where walls rise like cliffs and the market murmurs in the heat. Sesame oil glosses jars, copper clinks, and donkeys huff like tiny steam engines with opinions. A date seller promises miracles in a handful of brown sugar. Bold claim, but you respect the hustle. Here the city learns a new trick. You watch pictographs harden into cuneiform as a reed stylus pecks tidy wedges into clay. Around 3200 BCE, writing begins to keep ledgers of barley, beer, bricks, and stories. Bedtime reading that could bruise a toe if you drop it. Scribes tally rations with the confidence of people who have invented both math and snacks. And you feel the rhythm of lists. Grain in, grain out. Prayer in, blessing out. A stair-stepped mountain of brick climbs in the distance. The ziggurat isn't a house. It's a hinge, a patient ladder between people and powers. On its summit, a temple glows. Cool shadow, reed mats, trays of bread stacked like pale moons, and jugs of beer beaded with sweat. The earliest known cities rise here between the Tigris and Euphrates, and their memories bake into tablets, receipts, hymns, god lists, building plans, prayers. The Anunnaki filter through these lines as a collective, princely seed, great gods, the assembly that hears, decides, and signs off. You feel the city breathe to their schedule, sunrise incense, midday offerings, nightfall chants that curl upward like smoke signals to the stars. Historians still argue whether the Anunnaki began as a fixed roster or as a flexible title for whoever sits in the heavenly assembly. You test the question by walking district to district. In one quarter, canals glitter under Enki's care, waterlord, craftsman, the patron of cleverness, exactly the kind of supervisor who always knows where the good tools are and where someone hid the good beer. In another, incense beads around Inanna's courtyard. Love and war pulse under the same fierce gaze, and nobody double books a date and a battle here if they like their eyebrows. Names gather like neighborhoods. Ninurta with his storms, Ninhursag with her mountains, Utu with his clean light. A city of gods mirrors a city of people, specialists, allies, rivals, relatives, and you walk its avenues under a sky that listens. Along the canal that Eridu, older than the city's heartbeat, a fisherman mends a net while a priest mutters the morning syllables. A fringe tidbit floats by, one that will later streak across the internet like a comet. Some will say the Anunnaki are visitors from the stars, engineers with shiny tools who swoop in for gold and genetics and clock out before lunch. You taste the claim the way you sip new street soup, fun, spicy, and probably not your daily staple. The tablets you pass whisker of temples, river rituals, and councils assigning destinies. They do not show rockets, but they do show a cosmos governed like a city, where decisions arrive from above, stamped and sealed. A king kneels in a cool courtyard, offering bread, dates, and beer, and the room changes temperature like a cloud crossing the sun. The divine council is called, omens are read, Oil swirled on water, birds traced against dawn, the moon's impeccable grammar. The city's calendar follows those rhythms. Flood, planting, first fruits, harvest, the months shaved down to nothing and poured full again. A mainstream thread runs beside you as steady as the river. The Sumerian king list says kingship descended from heaven, stepping from primeval cities, Eridu to Bad Tabira to Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak, like a torch passed along rooftops. Historians still argue whether those impossibly long reigns are mythic math, political poetry, or ceremonial exaggeration meant to give earthly rule a celestial spine. You slip into a storeroom cool as a cave, where baskets of grain give off a toasted hush. On a shelf, tablets glow with ruled columns, hymns to the assembly, incense recipes, timetables for processions that snake through streets and climb the ziggurat staircase like a river of color. A quirky detail winks from the wall. A tiny clay dog sits buried in the bricks, a protective figurine pressed into the structure like a house charm. You run your fingers over terracotta nails stamped with prayers and sunk into foundations, ritual hardware that holds up the idea as much as the roof. Practical magic, you think, as a clerk scratches out a receipt for temple beer. Honestly, it's the most persuasive kind.
On the terrace, night opens wider. The Milky Way becomes a shining canal. Constellations march like officials through a gate. You can almost see the Anunnaki seated in a ring of stars, passing quiet judgments over the city's roofs. On the temple edge, a horned headdress catches moonlight. A priest whispers names that slip through your thoughts like fish. Scholars will map those names across centuries of clay, and historians still argue whether we are watching far-flung local cults braided together or a single inherited system trimmed and tuned by each city. You don't need the verdict to feel the pattern. Decisions fall like soft rain. Destinies settle like dust. Another solid detail steadies your steps. The great ziggurat at Ur, rebuilt by kings around the late 3rd millennium BCE, still stands in the desert, a skeletal mountain of fired brick. From your rooftop perch, you realize how much of the Anunnaki's presence is architecture and schedule. Stairs, platforms, altars, timetables. If you arrived expecting lightning bolts and soap opera triangles, you still get feeling, but it reads like an agenda. Convene, present offerings, hear omens, confirm fates. Honestly, it's comforting. If cosmic bureaucracy exists, maybe your life's forms are filed in the right drawer. A breeze pushes lamp smoke into soft ribbons. You think how law, memory, and worship dovetail here. Clay tablets as filing cabinets, temple kitchens as civic cafeterias, festivals as social glue. You turn a tablet and see a hymn called the Anunnaki, Great Gods Who Determine Destinies, a phrase that carries the softness of blessing and the steel of policy. A watchman on the wall sings a loop to stay awake, part prayer, part checklist, and you almost join because repetition is the secret handshake of sleep. Joke 3 arrives on schedule. Yes, you're basically attending a celestial staff meeting in pajamas, and somehow it's cozy. Back at the water's edge, you crouch and cup the river, cool, silty, faintly like a ceramic cup that decided to become a beverage. You look up at the procession of stars and feel the Anunnaki as presence more than plot, a constellation of seats filled by powers that mirror the city's departments: grain, water, love, war, time, sky. The surprise is how human the arrangement feels without becoming merely human. People make lists to remember, and so do gods. A lamp boat drifts away, a floating comma on black ink, and your breath settles into its pace. Somewhere, a goat finally stops arguing with a rope, a victory for bedtime everywhere. You tuck the names you've learned, An, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, into your pocket like warm pebbles and step back from the terrace, knowing the council will gather again as the moon thins and swells, as steady as footfalls on the ziggurat's stairs.
You keep your footing on the ziggurat steps as the air cools and the city's pulse slides into a slower tempo, but the council above is never fully off duty. Power has a bedtime, sure, but it also loves a late meeting. You picture the Anunnaki taking their places again, Enlil with the weather in his voice, Enki with damp sleeves from the workshop of the deep, Inanna glittering like the inside of a shell, Utu carrying daylight around like a lamp he never quite sets down. You pass a wall where the tiny clay dog from earlier keeps guard. Even house charms look alert when politics strolls by. You learn the rhythm. Petitions rise, decrees descend. Destinies get stapled to lives with the calm efficiency of a clerk who knows where all the reeds and seals are kept. Enlil sits like a mountain, the atmosphere itself wrapped around his shoulders, and the city feels him in every dust devil and harvest breeze. Enki, Lord of the Sweetwater, plays contrarian and fix-it friend. He's the one you text when your irrigation canal suddenly thinks it's a lounge. Inanna, fierce, laughing, strategic, crosses boundaries. War and love, market and throne room, city and steppe. She treats them all like rooms in a house and keeps keys in her hair. You hear cases brought like baskets. Who gets the first barley sheaves? Which canal wall takes the new bricks? Which king's promise matches his weight in offerings? No more saying you're literally dying unless you're ready for Enlil to check the minutes. A mainstream fact hums as steady as the drum below. In Mesopotamian myth, decisions are fixed when the assembly confers, and the tablets of destinies, symbol of cosmic authorization, are in the right hands. When the monstrous Anzu bird steals those tablets in one tale, the world's bureaucracy hiccups, storms forget their lines, and the council scrambles to restore the chain of command. Bureaucracy may not sparkle, but when it goes missing, everyone notices. Kind of like your favorite mug. You wander past singers rehearsing a hymn for Inanna's temple. The melody snakes like incense, while a priest reshuffles lines about victory and tenderness, about a goddess who can bend a king like a reed and wrap a lover like a silk bandage. Historians still argue whether the oldest versions of these songs came first from Uruk city temple complexes or traveled along trade routes before a scribe snagged them with wedges on clay. The debate doesn't slow your feet. You move as though the streets themselves usher you toward a story you already half know. It begins quietly. The council tires of human clamor. Too many cities, too many goats explaining their feelings at 3 a.m. Enlil, stern and frayed, approves measures to thin the noise. Plague, then famine, then drought. Each one an awful memo stamped with the council seal. Enki whispers workarounds. Cleaning rituals, granaries opened in proper sequence, clever instructions smuggled like coded jokes. The measures stall. The council lifts its eyes to something final. A flood, deep as forgetting, clean as a blank tablet.
You lean against a baked brick wall, cool on your shoulder, and watch Enki reach for mercy. In one version, he speaks through a reed wall to a good man, Atrahasis, because direct leaks are frowned upon in divine HR. Dismantle your house. Build a boat, he urges. Make it roofed like Apsu, the freshwater deep. In another telling, you hear the name Utnapishtim, the one preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh that later scholars will dig from Nineveh's library. Either way, the instructions sound like bedtime reading for shipwrights. Measure the hull. Seal the seams with pitch. Bring animals by pairs, bring craftspeople and family, bring seeds and the memory of cooking smoke. You feel the urgency, but also the care. An ark as a pantry, a city distilled to its essentials. The way you pack when you pretend you're minimalist and then slip in 3 extra snacks. Rain arrives with the authority of a clause that cannot be amended. Canals blur into river, street into current, drumbeat into thunder. For days, 7 in some tellings longer in others, the world rides a single dark wave. You and your sandals finally understand buoyancy. Then, in a silence that feels like a held breath, put slowly down. The boat grounds on a mountain. Birds become scouts, first a dove that circles back, then a swallow that hesitates, finally a raven that doesn't return. When the door opens, the smell of wet earth is as loud as trumpets. An altar rises from soaked stones, and the survivors' hands move by muscle memory. Fire kindled, offerings laid out, smoke lifting like a shy new alphabet. The gods, hungry after the long storm, gather to the scent like flies, says the old line you hear repeated in whispers, tender, irreverent, honest. Enlil arrives, furious that the plan met a loophole. Enki, standing a little to the side with that look of innocent mischief, argues for restraint. Punish particular wrongs, not the whole classroom. Send wolves to thin herds, not oceans to erase houses. The council listens. Utnapishtim and his wife receive a peculiar blessing, distance from life's clock, a home at the edge of maps. The flood, the council decrees, will not be repeated in that total way. The promise isn't a rainbow here. It's policy revised, minutes amended, a new line added to the tablets of Destinies. Balance disasters with remedies, noise with wisdom. You find the flood shadow also stamped on political paper. The Sumerian king list, a chronicle that marries history to ceremony, says plainly that kingship descends from heaven, settles in one city, then another. But between those lists lies a dividing line. The flood swept over. Before it, rain lengths roll out like miles of carpet, impossibly long, mythic math that makes you chuckle and glance at your own birthday like it's a rounding error. After it, rains shorten into human scale. Somewhere in that compression, ordinary time begins, and you feel how a story can reset a calendar without moving a single star.
A quirky detail catches your eye in the corridor where diviners train. A clay model of a sheep's liver, mapped like a tiny city of bumps and gates. Extispicy is the word, and apprentice priests lean over it like pilots. Each lobe bears names: Path of Enlil, Palace of Anu. And when real livers are consulted during state decisions, the diviner points and reads as if tracing the night sky on warm anatomy. It's half atlas, half oracle, and entirely sincere. You think of our earlier oil-on-water omens and smile. The ancient world keeps multiple dashboards open at once, carbohydrates in one tab, fate in another. Fringe whispers ride the breeze. Some late-night storytellers claim the flood was a cleanup of a labor force gone chatty, engineered by supervisory beings whose resumes include off-world commutes and a strict view on mining quotas. You tilt your head and let the theory drift by like a stray reed mat. It's flashy, and it borrows the right names: Enlil, Enki, Anunnaki, but the city around you answers with kitchens, courts, calendars, and witness seals pressed into clay. This is a cosmos where judgment looks like policy and mercy looks like a workaround, not like a docking schedule. You trace politics through festivals, too. When Inanna descends later, yes, we'll get there, her absence will throw markets and marriages off kilter, a reminder that divine personalities ripple into human ledgers. For now, you watch a king in clean linen stand before the council to renew a promise: protection of canals, fairness at scales, repair of walls before the rainy season surprises them again. He offers bread and beer. Remember the temple brew that apparently doubles as currency and courage? And the pledges taste like yeast and law. A scribe bends low over a tablet to capture every syllable. Somewhere that tablet will cool in a shelf quiet that outlasts crowns.
Historians still argue whether the flood memory arises from specific river catastrophes stitched into a grander myth, or from older Near Eastern motifs traded like recipes across cultures. You don't need the final footnote to feel the story's temperature. What matters tonight is how the Anunnaki's court holds tension without snapping it. Firm decrees, then humane amendments. Storms unleashed, then vessels built. A universal threat, then a particular rescue. It's government, but cosmic. And yes, you can practically hear the meeting adjourn with a soft thud of a seal stone. As the moon tips toward the horizon, a breeze slides down the ziggurat stairs and ruffles your hair like a kindly aunt. You step past the dog figurine again and swear it winks, which is what sleep does to certainty. You straighten your tunic, mentally promise to keep your sandals on airplane mode during future councils. Third joke, thank you for noticing. And start down toward the river. The city hums. Frogs negotiate treaties. Somewhere, a baker tests tomorrow's dough, and the smell tells you the flood is over for the night. The council will meet again, because it always does, weighing grain and thunderstorms and the sizes of promises. And you, faithful attendee in pajamas, will be there too. You slip into the temple precinct before dawn, feet whispering across tamped clay while the sky decides which shade of blue to try on first. Drums warm up like friendly thunder, and incense takes the stairs ahead of you, curling along lintels and around carved doorposts as if smoke knows the floor plan better than anyone. The corridors stay cool because the walls are thick as a paused river. You trail a palm over fired bricks and feel the city's pulse, offerings in, blessings out, moving as predictably as the moon's clean arithmetic. The Anunnaki are not abstract here. They're resident powers with pantry preferences and calendar gaze. Bread arrives in neat stacks of rounds, each one soft as a cloud that picked a sensible job. Beer breathes in sealed jars, brewed with bopir, twice-baked barley loaves, so the liquid carries a toasty whisper. Long reed straws rest in a basket nearby, meant to sip past floating chaff. You absolutely resist the urge to blow bubbles unless you want the high priest to invent a new rule with your name on it. Joke 1, noted in the minutes. Temple kitchens run like ships. Bakers, brewers, butchers, oil pressers, all on rations tallied in tidy wedges by a scribe who can multiply faster than a rumor. A novice ushers you toward the courtyard, where the day's first small procession tightens its sandals. The head priestess, hair clasped, eyes calm, walks with measured lightness, and you can almost hear hinges turn as doors along the divine corridor open in sequence. Offerings pass like well-timed comets, dates, onions, fish, beautifully practical things that taste like loyalty. The inner room feels close and precise. A statue sits wrapped in luminous cloth, metal eyes catching the kind of light that makes you stand straighter. You place your breath among the murmurs and feel it join the slow engine that keeps a city tuned. Omens get a corner office. In a side chamber, a diviner spreads a tablet listing yesterday's sky notes, the moon's slimness, a faint ring around Venus, a visitor of cloud that looked like a sheep with opinions. An apprentice holds a bowl with oil shimmering on water and watches how droplets drift, how curves meet edges, reading the small choreography as if it were a letter slid under the door. Calendars grow out of these habits. Market days, debt remissions, harvest starts, and royal announcements hang from celestial pegs. You realize this bureaucracy is the gentlest kind, the sort that makes sure the bread comes out of the oven at the right hour.
Nippur, The sacred city of Enlil comes up in conversation like a respected elder. His house there, a clerk murmurs, is where decisions that matter most get stamped. You tuck away the mainstream fact. For centuries, kings from other cities sought legitimation at Nippur by tending Enlil's temple, letting politics borrow a halo. Scribes copied hymn cycles and god lists there that traveled far beyond its walls, a portable map of the Anunnaki's relationships. You love that. Portable holiness, the way a network carries itself in clay, ready to be read by lamplight 300 miles away and 3,000 years later. You follow the smell of baking to the long kitchen, where rows of bread bulge like suns on the rise. A woman slaps dough with the confidence of a drummer, talks about her sister's wedding, and asks you, politely, not to lean on the flour bins. You are but dust, and also you are on the bins. She points to a quirky charm over the oven, a tiny copper snake with a friendly grin, meant to keep burns away. You remember the clay dog we passed yesterday, winking from a wall niche, and grin back. This city loves its protective mascots. Near the vats, a brewer hums a hymn while stirring. Later, an administrative tablet will cool with the evidence. So many loaves, so many jars. Proof that in the Ur-3 period, people could basically be paid in bread and beer, which is perhaps the most honest payroll in history. The king arrives like a well-rehearsed sunrise. He isn't a god, but he is the one who speaks between worlds on festival days, and the building reminds him with polite grandeur. Robe brushed, beard intentional. He steps forward to pour libations before the statue, and you watch the liquid's thin voice as it hits the stone channel and disappears, down, away, offered. The ritual has muscle memory. On certain nights, he will sit with the high priestess and recite love poetry to Inanna, the so-called sacred marriage rite. Historians still argue whether that union was a symbolic drama enacted with song and staging, or a literal coupling meant to fuse kingship and fertility. Either way, the city takes the blessing seriously, treating the words like rain coaxed into language. Law sidles in through ritual doors. After offerings, the king hears petitions. A canal wall that needs mending, a debt that grew teeth, a dispute over whose goat looks suspiciously familiar. He swears fairness by the gods present, because justice here isn't just a civic word. It's a smell in this very room. Steles and tablets will carry the shape of that promise. Edicts, contracts, and later famous law collections, framed by invocations that say, in essence, by Utu the sun god, by Enlil, by the Anunnaki, this stands. You can almost hear the seal stone kiss the clay like a soft gavel. And yes, you remember that sheep liver model from last night. Even legal schedules check with the heavens when the stakes are high.
Music thickens the courtyard. Frame drums, lyres, and flutes slide into a pace that feels like walking across a river on flat stones. Dancers thread the shaded edge in spirals. You try not to count steps, but you count anyway, because humans do. A scribe tilts a tablet and lets you scan a hymn to Inanna, lines stepping upward in parallel praise that feels exactly like climbing stairs. A fringe tidbit leans close at the edge of the music. Later storytellers will claim temple precincts housed sacred prostitution, a phrase that flashes easily but probably mistakes complex roles, musicians, weavers, caretakers, priestesses, for something they were not. You file it with other shiny misunderstandings that look like gold until you test them with a hammer. You check the time by shade length. The courtyard shifts from silver to gold as the sun climbs. Couriers come and go with clay cylinders rolled in reeds, sealed with those little art galleries called cylinder seals. You roll one between your fingers and leave a parade of figures impressed on wet clay. A god leading a supplicant, a star, a fish, your signature, now a tiny festival. The impression feels official and magical at once, like signing a check with a constellation. Somewhere a clerk smiles because you did it right on the first try, joke 2, you're now certified to stamp anything that does not run away. Back in the omen room, the diviner pins today's sky note to a larger series. The compendia grow like gardens. If the moon is crowned with a faint ring, if Jupiter lingers where it shouldn't, if an eclipse eats the sun, each event has a reading for crops, kings, and wars. Historians still argue whether these readings sprang mostly from catalogued memories of disasters or from patterns intuited and then standardized by scholarly schools that loved order as much as bread. Either way, when a bad sign shows up, the temple knows what to do. Substitute rituals, additional offerings, a rewritten schedule, a public reassurance sung in a steady voice that makes shopkeepers breathe easier. At lunch, you accept a small loaf and a cup of beer, temple brew, smooth as a well-argued prayer. You try to sip with the long reed like a pro and immediately inhale a sneeze of malt that makes the kitchen laugh. Joke 3, you have now performed the ancient rite of new person meets carbonation. A brewer pats your back and says the recipe is older than all the kings you can name. You believe him because the taste feels carved into your tongue. On the wall, someone has scratched a smiling fish. You salute it with your cup and try again, slower.
Afternoon trims the festival's edge. The statue receives new clothing, textiles embroidered with galaxies' patience, while attendants polish metal fittings until you can see your face, and your face looks pious. The god is fed again, the leftovers redistributed to staff and to the poor at the gate, because the economy of holiness doesn't end at the threshold. You take the gate shift for a moment and feel the stream. Widows with baskets, farmers with callous news, a boy carrying a lamb that keeps trying to argue its case. You remember the flood prayers we murmured last night and feel how ritual is also infrastructure. Channels kept clear, walls repaired before the rainy season decides to get dramatic. By late light, records pile up. A clerk reads them back in a voice that would soothe fever. 60 loaves to the brewer's team, 4 jars to the lyre players, oil for lamps, wood for ovens, offerings directed onward to a shrine across the canal. Administrative tablets from ages like this will pile in museums one day, and they'll tell a story almost as tender as hymns. Who ate, who sang, who cleaned, who carried. Somewhere, an ancient accountant invents the spreadsheet and wisely keeps it in clay so no one can open it after hours. Dusk lifts you onto the roof again, the place where incense meets wind. Below, the city settles into the gentle racket of dinners and lullabies. Above, stars punch in for the night shift. You think about how intimate the Anunnaki feel after a day of trays and chants. Not far, not abstract, but threaded through the ordinary gears. Bread sliced, scales balanced, contracts sealed, drums counted. The corridor that began cool and careful now radiates a quiet warmth. Rituals have left their thermal signature. You tighten your sandals for the stairs, give the clay dog at the landing a respectful nod, and follow the last ribbon of incense down into the soft noise of evening, ready to carry the schedule of gods into your own small, good sleep.
You keep walking while the city folds itself into evening, and time starts doing that temple trick where hours become corridors and corridors become centuries. Street lamps blur into torches, torches into comet tails, and you ride the glow as Sumer's neighborhoods rearrange their mailboxes. Names shift, languages lean from Sumerian to Akkadian, the way a singer eases into a lower key and holds it. The assembly of gods still sits, but the seating chart updates. Titles crossed out, new ones penciled in, everyone shuffling politely while the drum keeps time below. First, the air tastes of empire. Sargon of Akkad steps through dust with soldiers who know the roads as well as the rivers, and city-states that once argued over canal bricks now report to a farther address. The Anunnaki, not strangers to organization, adjust. Patron gods travel with governors like banners. Divine authority becomes a passport stamped at every gate. Enlil still feels like a mountain. Enki still smells faintly of cool reed marsh and clean tools. Inanna, now more often voiced as Ishtar in Akkadian, keeps her fierce, laughing stride. You can tell power has shifted because hymns wear new accents, but the melody remains familiar. Babylon rises from the flatland with an ambition that sounds like a festival drumline that never quite stops. By the 18th century BCE, a king named Hammurabi writes himself into memory, carving decisions into a tall black stele. Prologue of cosmic authorization, columns of judgments, epilogue of blessings and curses, civic power framed by the gods' gaze. Mainstream fact to hold like a warm bowl. Hammurabi rules roughly 1792 to 1750 BCE, and that stele survives, topped by a relief where the sun god, Shamash or Utu, hands the royal ruler a rod and ring, the right to measure and to judge. You glance up at the carved rays and hear the old council behind it, the Anunnaki's assembly underwriting earthly law with heavenly stationery. But the real hinge of Babylon's voice turns each spring when priests recite a creation epic that sounds like a river inventing thunder. You're shoulder to shoulder along the processional way as Marduk's statue travels from his great house to the Akitu house outside the walls, the deity on retreat, the city holding its breath. The Enuma Elish unfurls, waters mingle, chaos rears and hisses, and Marduk, young, bright, storm-handed, defeats the wildness, splits it like a fishmonger, and builds the world from its pieces, hanging the constellations with a craftsman's calm. Then comes the line that changes the seating chart. The assembly acclaims Marduk as king of the gods, not by erasing the others, but by arranging them around his new center. 50 names, 50 roles, a choir with a louder conductor.
Festival braids theology with theater, and you feel both. The king enters the temple to be ritually humbled. The high priest removes the royal insignia and, as the old instructions say, gives him a crisp, corrective slap. If tears appear, the omen smiles on the year. Quirky detail, yes, but also a precise calibration. Power reminds itself who authorizes it. You dab your own eyes in empathetic solidarity and pretend it's just incense. Joke 1, the minutes will note modest audience mistiness. Historians still argue whether reciting Enuma Elish at Akitu served mainly as political charter for Babylon's supremacy or as a cosmic drama first and foremost. You don't settle it, you just feel how public ritual can tighten a city like laces. Meanwhile, the roster stretches and specializes. Nabu, Marduk's son, rises as patron of writing. You spot his stylus-tipped rod and grin because every scribe you've met would love their tools canonized. Shamash keeps courtrooms honest with that clean measuring light. Sin, Nanna, moves tides of time with his silver metronome. Ninurta shoulders storms and warcraft. Ninhursag tends the patient earth. Ishtar's cult flares across cities. Lions crouch at her door. Soldiers whisper her name before they lace sandals. Lovers do the same, which is awkward in line, but historically accurate. The word Anunnaki flexes here. Sometimes it means the great gods in council. Sometimes the 7 stern judges below. Sometimes it's an honorific for whoever is on the celestial board that week. You keep up by listening for context, the way you can tell whether board means dinner or directors from the tone of a sentence. Northward, the roads harden under Assyrian boots. River by river, they inherit, improve, and loudly annotate the idea of empire.
The city of Ashur lends its name to both people and principal god. Soon, Nineveh and Kalhu, Nimrud, glitter with palaces where walls read like long panels of moving pictures. The pantheon's furniture gets rearranged again. Ashur absorbs traits of Enlil and sometimes Marduk. Lists place him at the top as king of the gods because administrative charts, like hedges, are clipped to match the shape of the house. You pass lamassu lit a gate, winged bulls with human faces and a 1,000-yard stare, and instantly stand straighter. Joke 2, nothing improves posture like the suspicion a granite cow can read your soul. Assyria's scholars turn omen reading into a professional sport. Court scribes refresh compendia, write to the king with the weather report of the heavens, and prescribe remedies to nudge fate towards something manageable. Extra offerings, substitute rituals, rerouted travel. Your liver model lesson from earlier returns. Extisipy and astronomy sit side by side like two dashboards for one journey. A fringe tidbit pads softly into the throne room. During a dire eclipse, the court enacts a substitute king ritual. A stand-in wears the crown within a controlled bubble, while the real king lives off stage until the dangerous days pass. Afterwards, the substitute's office ends with a hush and a veil of ceremony you politely don't tug aside. Either way, the logic is the same as our old temple schedules. Absorb bad luck into a ritual container so the realm can breathe.
On the ground, the Anunnaki live in carved stone and baked law. Boundary stones, called kuduru, rise from fields carved with stars, scorpions, horned crowns, divine emblems that guarantee land grants and terms. By the Anunnaki, the curses sing, "Do not move this stone, do not erase this line." You remember the copper snake over the oven and the clay dog snugged into a wall. The countryside has mascots too, just hewn larger and signed in thunderclaps. The notion is simple and beautiful. Humans promise, gods witness, stones remember. Language keeps shifting under your sandals. Sumerian settles into a learned tongue for liturgy. Akkadian chats in the streets and writes most letters. Later, Aramaic arrives with the casual confidence of a lingua franca and borrows a seat. Myths translate and retranslate, and with each move, the Anunnaki's titles flex. In one city, Lord of the Storm still means the mountain voice. In another, it folds into the national god's resume. In some lists, the Ajiji hover as a separate circle of sky gods, while the Anunnaki lean underworld-ward. In others, the terms overlap like two notes in a chord. Historians still argue whether that shift reflects a real theological demotion or just a scribal preference that hardened into habit. You shrug fondly. Bureaucracy happens in heaven, too. You angle back to Babylon for another Akitu, because the parade never gets old. This time you notice how the priests speak Marduk's 50 names like a staircase, rising by syllables until the room feels taller. Then they honor the rest of the assembly, the Anunnaki who assent and advise. It isn't erasure, it's orchestration. Old powers carry new sheet music. If you listen carefully, you can hear Enlil's mountain steadiness humming inside Ashur's crown, and Inanna's ancient ferocity ringing through Ishtar's songs, a duet across centuries that still hits the high notes. Anchors keep your feet honest. Kings build and rebuild ziggurats. Dates fall and become beer. Contracts end with seals you could pick out of a lineup. Assyrian palace reliefs show tribute processions that look like impeccably organized moving days. A Babylonian hymn calls the gods to a banquet where destinies are assigned, and you hear the old council again, older than empires, procedural as ever. The scripts change, but the stage directions remain. Convene, deliberate, assign measures, File the minutes in clay. Joke 3 tiptoes in while you scan yet another god list without coffee. Marduk seems to collect titles the way your aunt collects ceramic chickens, affectionately, relentlessly, with shelving to match.
Some nights the stories turn dark around the edges. Underworld judges, the 7 Anunnaki of Earth, the dead filing past like a very quiet festival. Other nights they blaze with love and war. Ishtar's chariots rattling like tambourines, Nergal's heat like noon that simply will not end. You hold both registers because the cities did, laying feast beside fast the way tablets stack fact beside prayer. And while historians still argue whether Babylon's theology truly dethroned older powers or simply clothed them in new forms, your ears tell you compromise is the everyday miracle. Rearrange the divine chairs to fit the room, but keep the meeting going. Night draws its cool hand across the rooftops. Somewhere a brewer hums the same tune you heard in Ur because yeast ignores politics. The sky above you is a ledger with new names penciled in, but the constellations still file their reports on time. The Anunnaki remain, an assembly that adapts like a living language. Chairs scraped forward to make room for Marduk here, for Ashur there, while the old habit persists beneath it all. Destinies weighed, decisions stamped, incense rising in thin, steady lines you could almost balance on with your breath. You crouch at the lip of a trench as wind flicks grit off a low hill like it's paging through a ruffled book. The year on your pocket watch says 19th century, but the smell says baked clay and lamp smoke. And that's our cue. Men in long coats and improbably clean hats lean on shovels. Local work crews move with a rhythm older than payroll. A foreman taps a pick against stone that isn't stone at all, but a tablet, soft as a stale cookie and twice as breakable. You breathe shallow, because you've learned that the old world is basically a ceramic library with anxiety. Someone lays down a reed mat. Someone else wets a brush. The surface blushes darker, and you recognize the tracks, wedge after wedge, marching like tiny birds across damp earth. Far to the northwest, a cliff called Behistun holds the master key, a mountainside postcard in 3 scripts. A young officer, Henry Rawlinson, climbs it with the persistence of a goat with a merit badge, copies the old Persian lines, and a door creaks open. Names, kings, a grammar that begins to whisper. From Old Persian, the eye jumps to Babylonian and Elamite. Sounds catch, patterns repeat. By the 1850s, scholars can read Akkadian well enough that a famous test in 1857 asks 4 men to translate the same cuneiform text independently. Their close agreement convinces the Royal Asiatic Society that the script has been truly deciphered. That's a mainstream milepost you tuck beside your stylus. Modern voices now talk to ancient clerks across a chasm of dust. The trench widens into rooms. Austin Henry Layard strolls through palaces whose walls are long stone movies. Lions hunt, kings pray, rivers bend, and his collaborator Hormuzd Rassam follows seams of debris toward treasure that doesn't glitter, it rustles. We are in Nineveh now, on the mound of Koyunjik, and baskets keep arriving full of broken pages. Ashurbanipal's library, a king's hoard of knowledge carefully curated, then violently shelved by fire and collapse. You sit with the team and lay shards on reed mats, edges searching for edges. The fragments look like a scattered flock, but patience is a magnet. Claws of script find their mates. You feel the old rooms take a long breath. One afternoon, a young assistant named George Smith bends over a clay slice and goes very still. He reads a line about a boat, a flood, a mountain. He breathes like someone who's been running. When he presents the discovery in 1872, newspapers go theatrical because a story that had lived in scripture and memory now blinks from clay with names you know. Utnapishtim, a bird that doesn't return, the smell of offerings like flies. Reports say Smith leaps up, strips his coat in excitement, and paces like a man who just found his childhood dream tucked behind the radiator. You smile, remembering our night with Atrahasis and the reed wall. The circle closes with an audible click. Back in London, Paris, Berlin, Istanbul, and later Baghdad, museums sprout rooms that smell faintly of dust and consensus. You walk aisles where cylinder seals roll their tiny parades under glass, where Kuduro stones fix land with constellations and curses, where our old clay dog lounges in a tray labeled apotropic domestic, like it has always lived there. A small copper snake, remember the oven charm? Smiles from another case, a comma in metal. On a shelf sits a baked clay liver model, mapped with bumps and gates, and you flash to that omen classroom where diviners read destiny with warm hands. The past is rearranged into politely lit neighborhoods, but the rooms still share a wall. Hymn beside contract, prayer beside shipping note, omen beside recipe for barley cakes. Civilization, it turns out, is an index. Decipherment, you realize, is carpentry. Scholars fit signs to sounds, sounds to words, words to genres. They publish sign lists that look like sheet music for square-billed birds. Bilingual tablets become teachers. A Sumerian word on the left hums into an Akkadian gloss on the right. The ancient habit of list-making rescues the modern habit of dictionary-making. In the 20th century, the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary begins its long march, decades of careful volumes that make Akkadian as searchable as a tidy pantry. You hear the echo of temple logistics in every entry. Somewhere a brewer is nodding, proud of the shared devotion categories. Joke 1 floats past like a friendly reed boat. Yes, you are getting sleepy reading a dictionary, but in the best possible way.
Field schools pull you back outside. At Leonard Woolley peels back layers like pastry to find a royal cemetery. Lyres curve like smiles from the soil. Lapis and gold wink softly, and the ziggurat's brick stair returns to the sun you and I watched rise over its shoulder. In a deep cut, Woolley spots clean silt and calls it a flood layer, the river's tantrum caught in cross-section. Historians still argue whether Woolley's band of mud is the flood behind the legends, or simply one of many dramatic inundations that cities learned to survive. Either way, the shovel pauses. The story breathes into the earth and back again. In the storerooms, the work looks less romantic and more like a paperwork marathon. Conservators wash, dry, and mend. A smudge becomes a syllable, and a syllable becomes the hinge that lets two fragments finally kiss. Quirky tidbit to tuck beside the copper snake. 19th century explorers loved squeezes, damp paper pressed into inscriptions to lift a perfect, raised copy. Wonderful if removed promptly, disastrous if left long enough that the sign decides your paper is a better apartment. Every generation learns gentler hands. Every generation apologizes to the last chip of clay and carries on. By lamplight, you track the word Anunnaki through the re-legible forest. In hymns and omens, underworld court lists and creation prologues, the term lands with shades you've learned to hear. Some translators lean princely seed, some the gods of heaven and earth, some prefer a corporate title, the Great Assembly. In later texts, the label sometimes narrows to stern judges below. In others, it fans out to the celestial boardroom again. Bilingual god lists help. Colophons help. Even little school tablets help, where a bored apprentice has scratched a star, a fish, and the note,
copied and checked, which is exactly the energy you want from the universe. The debate over who cracked what becomes a subplot with strong personalities. Rawlinson and Edward Hincks share or spar for priority. Julius Oppert invents etymologies with cheerful courage. Edward Norris compiles the patient lexica. Later Sumeriologists tightened a grammar until verb chains sit straight like drilled recruits. You slip into a lecture hall, air hot, chalk quick, and hear arguments about whether a sign is phonetic here but logographic there, whether a prefix is an old river bend or a new canal, whether a guard name wears a determinative hat or strolls in bareheaded. Joke 2. Somewhere in the back, a student has drawn a tiny lamassu in the margin to remind everyone to keep their posture heroic. You make a quiet pilgrimage to the cliff where the modern reading began. Behistun rises
like a bookstand for the sky. A king stands with his enemies roped like punctuation. Lines march calmly in 3 tongues. From the ledge, you picture Rawlinson dangling with notebooks stuffed everywhere and whisper thanks to whatever mountain goat taught him where to put his feet. Then it's back to Nineveh's rooms, where the shelving is new, but the quiet is old. An inscription boasts that Ashurbanipal can read tablets from before the flood, which, after George Smith, feels less like royal swagger and more like a librarian's proud flex. Museums update labels as the century turns and turns again. Pieces scattered by excavation and empire slowly pair up. Iraq builds a national museum to hold its own deep words. Wars rattle shelves and staff form human chains to carry what can be carried. You notice how many tablets are administrative and how comforting that is. Song beside tax, omen beside recipe, prayer beside canal repair memo. The Anunnaki, who once sat like stars around a council table, now perch on exhibit mounts, still judging destinies in a way. Because galleries assign meanings too. The board meeting in pajamas you attended on the ziggurat roof lives on in vitrines and footnotes and docents' careful spiels. And your part? You stand quietly and read names out loud, because speaking them feels like an offering small enough to hold. Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Ishtar, Nanna, Utu, Nabu, Ninurta, Ninhursag. Chairs you've watched scraped across centuries to make room for Marduk there, for Ashur there. You trace how Anunnaki keeps finding edges and seats. A label elastic enough to fit courtrooms and festivals, underworld gates and spring parades. Joke 3 arrives with a wink from the past. The Divine Council is basically the ultimate committee, and of course it survives. Committees are immortal, especially when they have their own stationery.
Evening leans across the cases. A guard clears his throat with the gentle finesse of you two dimming the lights. You tuck a museum map into your pocket like a small tablet and step into modern air that still smells faintly of river. On the bus, you pass a bakery and, without thinking, buy a round of bread and a bottle that promises something with barley. You taste, and the day resolves. Lists and ladders, ink and ash, a library reborn into hands that know what it is to carry offerings up a stair and set them down with care. Somewhere a researcher yawns like a temple door. Somewhere a curator pats a clay dog goodnight. And you, faithful reader, let the old wedges keep turning, your breath steady, one sign at a time.
You step out of the gallery lights and into the brighter, trickier glare of modern screens where the Anunnaki learn to trend. The corridor you've been walking becomes a timeline with autoplay, and suddenly the Council of Gods is explaining orbital mechanics in comment sections. You scroll past thumbnails with thunder font titles and eyes that glow like overcooked pixels. Some voices insist the Anunnaki are spacefaring supervisors who tinker with genomes between coffee breaks, who carve landing strips into deserts, who need Earth's gold for reasons that sound suspiciously like a sci-fi episode where the props budget ran out. You tap the brakes and feel the old clay in your pockets, the beer rations, the hymn lists, the liver model mapped like a city, and let the weight remind you what our sources actually say. Mainstream fact to hold steady, the word Anunnaki lives in Sumerian and Akkadian tablets across millennia, describing a council of great gods, sometimes of heaven and earth, sometimes judges of the underworld, embedded in rituals, treaties, laments, and kingly boasts. Those words survive in thousands of clay records, copied, checked, sealed, and stored with the bureaucratic tenderness of people who love a good list. The texts do not read like lab notebooks from Star Labs. They read like a city breathing. Offerings in, judgments out. Festivals scheduled, empires rearranging the seating chart. Destinies assigned and witnessed by names you now know well enough to whisper. The Fringe turns its volume up anyway, and you walk with it a bit because curiosity is polite. You meet claims that Anunnaki means those who from heaven to earth came, a translation that would make our careful scribes splutter barley beer through their reed straws. You hear about a hidden planet that swings by like an uninvited relative every few thousand years to cause mayhem. You hear that ziggurats are rocket gantries that forgot their rockets. You hear that mines in far-off lands were managed by celestial foremen with poor labor relations. Quirky tidbit to file under modern folklore. There's even a run of novelty coins and tattoos for these theories, little Nibiru keychains and cuneiform scripts that bravely spell pizza. You smile, because human imagination is a garden with volunteer pumpkins, glorious and a bit unruly.
Then you do what you've learned to do. You bring the conversation back to clay. You picture the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary marching its handsome volumes across decades. You bring to mind the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative turning shelves into pixels. You remember how a scribe graded an apprentice tablet copied and checked, how a brewer's ration list met a musician's wages on the same damp page. Historians still argue whether the late first millennium use of Anunnaki marks a narrower underworld cohort or a general council title wearing new clothes, but they do so with philology, not with drone footage of suspiciously square rocks. You let the music of real words drown out the reverb of speculation. Pop culture uses the theories like glitter, which is both messy and sometimes charming. The Anunnaki wander into novels as cold patrons of star empires, into metal albums as thunderous syllables, into video games as unlockable lore, into memes where lamassu correct your posture from across your feed. Joke 1, you unconsciously straighten up because granite cows still judge. Sometimes these retellings are playful. Sometimes they borrow authority they didn't earn. You don't swap them all away. Stories want to travel. You simply keep one hand on the railing labeled Text Some Far and nod to the remixes while you walk. When someone says, "But why are there winged figures with baskets and watches?" you remember the wall reliefs where genies carry buckets and cone-shaped objects, likely purifying implements. And you recall that our ancestors stored sacred water before it learned to come from taps. When someone points at the 8-pointed star and whispers, "spaceship," you remember Inanna's emblem and a sky that was already a calendar, already a drama. When a thread claims the king list's long lifespans are alien HR files, you gently reintroduce poetry and political theology, hyperboles that make sacred time feel large enough to hold a city's hope.
You also admit something tender. Ancient people already lived in a world that felt full of elsewhere. The Apsu, the freshwater deep, the heavens tiered like terraces, the underworld with its judges, omens that stitched meteorology to ethics. You've walked through those rooms. They don't need spacecraft to feel cosmic. Their wonder is municipal and immense at once, like standing on a ziggurat and watching the Milky Way act exactly like a canal that refused to stay local.
Modern scholarship plays a slower game than the algorithm. Grammars prune, sign lists fatten, museum registers recover after turmoil. Archaeologists return to a mound and plot a square 4 meters by 4, and the first find of the day is a broken jar that still smells faintly, impossibly, of sesame. Joke 2. No one ever clicks a thumbnail labeled, "We double-checked a determinative and now sleep better." But honestly, you would. Quiet victories accumulate. A fragment finds its mate. A school tablet reveals a curriculum. A Kuduru's curse deterred one land grab we happen to have a litter about. The Anunnaki sit in those recoveries like calm witnesses. You think back to the oven's copper snake, to the clay dog asleep in the wall, to the reed straws, to the substitute king wearing danger like a raincoat. Pop culture loves the fireworks. The tablets preserve the pilot lights. The gentle mystery isn't aliens among us. It's humans making meaning on purpose together. It's cities learning to synchronize with rivers and stars, to bake calendars into bread, to call justice by the names of light. It's a council of powers mirrored in a council of people, some days clever, some days unkind, always returning for another meeting with incense in their hands and minutes on their tongues. A mainstream anchor keeps you from floating into rumor. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 11, with its flood story that George Smith read out in 1872, isn't a YouTube spoiler dropped by time travelers. It's a copy from Nineveh's royal library, itself drawn from older Akkadian and Sumerian traditions, texts that were taught, copied, worn at the edges by fingers that turned them. The miracle is not an extraterrestrial index. The miracle is endurance. Clay that was supposed to be yesterday's memo becoming tomorrow's memory. Historians still argue whether some late myths showing gods assigning destinies at banquets reflect court rituals more than cosmic beliefs, whether the Assyrian elevation of Ashur was genuine theology or imperial branding, whether specific flood layers under cities fueled universal stories or simply resonated with them. The arguments are patient and textual and excavated. They don't glow in the dark, but they hold up in daylight. You keep your lamp low and let the calm phrases lead you. The tablet says. The sign list suggests. The parallel passage implies. Meanwhile, the Anunnaki go on being useful in art. They haunt a poem you write without meaning to. They sit at the edge of a film as a silhouette whose name never gets said. They show up in a classroom where a kid draws a ziggurat that looks suspiciously like a layer cake. Joke 3. You approve this pastry theology. They remind you that committees, however divine, are perhaps the most human invention of all. The cosmic meeting is a mirror. We still gather, read minutes, revise plans, try again. At the quiet end of the feed, you close the tab and listen. The same slow drum from Uruk is still under everything. A breeze moves the curtain and smells a little like clay, a little like warm bread, a little like lamp smoke remembering stars. You set the wilder theories gently aside like shiny stones and keep the ones that hold weight. The council, the calendar, the care. You nod to the lamassu in your posture, to Marduk's 50 names like a staircase, to Inanna's fierce laughter echoing down an alley of time, and to Enki's damp cuffs when mercy finds a loophole. Then you tuck the night around your shoulders as if it were a robe borrowed from a statue,
and you let the old assembly adjourn, not with a bang, but with the faint click of a seal stone pressed into clay. You let the words lengthen and soften, each one floating a little longer before it lands. The ziggurat stairs you climbed all night grow shallow in your memory, their edges rounding into simple terraces where your breath steps down, then down again. The city grows quieter until the market is only a hush and the ovens are only warmth left over, like the glow in a kettle after tea. Lamps become fireflies. Fireflies become stars. Stars become the calm, even ceiling of a room that asks nothing of you but rest. You feel the old river thicken into sleep, its banks folding like blankets into the dark. The copper dog curls in its niche as if the wall itself is a gentle hand. The copper snake above the oven loosens into a thin smile and keeps the last of the heat where it belongs. Somewhere, a brewer stacks empty jars, and their soft, ceramic clink is just a slow heartbeat counting down to silence. You stand on the roof one last time, and the Milky Way is a quiet canal with no boats and no errands, only the slow, polished surface of night. If thoughts come, they arrive like distant processions, soft drums, steady steps, nothing urgent. You let them pass under the gate with the lamassu you've learned to imitate, shoulders easy, gaze kind. The Council of Gods, that patient meeting you've attended in your pajamas, closes its tablets and sets the seals aside. The minutes can wait until morning. Destinies, too, can hum along without you for a while. You have already offered what you needed to offer: attention, curiosity, a small round of breath like bread, and the room accepts it with quiet grace. So you flatten into the mattress like fresh clay set to dry, smooth and unhurried. Your lungs choose the oldest meter: inhale, exhale, the hymn that knows itself. In some tender corner of your mind, Inanna's star holds steady, Utu's light fades to a pale ribbon, Enki's water curls into a hush against the shore. You are safe inside the city that knows how to sleep. You are safe in the story that knows how to end. When the last ember of the lamp settles into dark, the night takes your hand and says in its slowest voice, "Rest now, rest."